Welcome. As people start rolling in, we'll get started. We have over 100 people signed up for this webinar today. So hopefully if you're seeing the slide and you're seeing Patrick and I on the screen, you're in the right place. We are going to talk about Housing North's, or the 10-county region, housing needs assessment with Patrick Bowen from Bowen National today. This is just a slide to remind you of who we are at Housing North, what we do, and then you can see that there is some links on the bottom where you can find the data and resources. We do have about a 45-minute presentation from Patrick, so we want to ask you to please put any questions you have in the Q&A. We will answer them at the end unless it's really pertinent to what Patrick is talking about. We also just want to ask you for grace and understanding as we dive into this really comprehensive report on the housing needs assessment for our 10-county region. Once we get through this webinar, we do have we'll have the information on our website, and then we'll be working diligently over the next few weeks to get a Q&A about the data and summary sheets for each of the counties available. So right now, I want to introduce Patrick, give people a chance to come in, and thank you all for being here. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen so Patrick can do that and let him give an introduction to who he is.
All right, thanks, Yara. Again, I'm Patrick Bowen, president of Bowen National Research. We're a Ohio-based real estate research firm, but we do work all over the United States, all 50 states. We do site-specific market feasibility studies, but then we also do these larger housing needs assessments. And so I think when we started this process, Yara, we started talking maybe last late summer, early fall. And so it's been many months in the making. And so I'm excited to do this presentation. Keeping in mind, these are the highlights. The study itself is voluminous. It's a very big report. And so a lot to digest. There's certainly a lot of things we could cover, but just time permitting, we're going to focus in on, I think, the biggest things that we think are relevant. Yara, am I ready to start? Do we want to wait another minute or?
You know, people are still rolling in, but I think we should get started. It is after 10, and so you can go ahead.
Share screen. All right, Yara, thumbs up. You can see that. Okay, thank you. And let me make it the big version. There we go. All right, so we provided a regional housing needs assessment of the 10 counties in northern Michigan. In addition to that, we have individual county chapters, so that if you are interested only in a specific county, you're going to a meeting, doing a presentation or whatever, and you just need only a specific county, you have individual chapters that are addendums to the report that are, I think, very useful and very concise, though. And then we also have individual communities that have commissioned market studies, whether it was towns, villages, or townships. So that is another option to work through Housing North if you want an individual community analysis. There are some parameters on how small of a community we would want to do that on, because some communities are pretty small and it's hard to assess when you lack much housing to begin with and you have a small population base. So anyway, a lot of different community level stuff. Today, we're going to focus really on the region as a whole and then the counties in themselves, how they compare to each other. This is the scope of the work that went into this exercise. A lot of different demographic, economic data. Clearly, we have housing supply information, whether it's rental supply or the for sale housing market. Then we do housing gap estimates for every individual county on different affordability levels, whether it's the rental side or the for sale side. So you'll see the total units that are needed on each one of these counties. And then we wrap up with conclusions and recommendations. So these are the 10 counties that are were covered in the area. And so as you'll see here in a second, we do have data that compares each county with the other and then the region as a whole. So I have a handful of slides on some demographics. Some of the stuff you'll know, or at least assume to be the case, but you'll see at least here, again, representations of how the counties compare to each other. We also have some projections included in here as well. A lot of folks wouldn't have access to. So we want to share that with you. So population in terms of what's happening across the region. Two of the counties are expected to grow from 2022 to 2027, while the rest are either expected to stay stable or just experience some minor declines in total population. But keep in mind, this is a housing needs assessment. And so what we focus on is households. So I'll show you households in a second. But I do have data on various population aspects. So I want to show you just a few of those that are, I think, pretty relevant. This is minority population for the area. And minorities represent less than 10% of the overall region's population. It really doesn't matter across the region. It's pretty consistent in terms of the composition of your population by race. This is population by education attainment. So whether those folks that don't have a high school degree or have a high school degree with some college, and then those that have a post-secondary college degree. And you can see across the region where those concentrations are. Pay attention to the southern part of the region, the south and southeast part, because you'll see common trends occurring or common characteristics. And so in this case, you have a lot of folks that do not have a high school diploma in that southeast portion, over 14,000 across the region that do not have a high school diploma. This is the share of unmarried population. So this is adults that are unmarried. And you can see towards the bottom half of the region is where the greatest shares are for those that are unmarried. And the reason we have this in here and the reason it's relevant to housing is just like income and other aspects. When you have a large share of folks that are unmarried, it is not universally true, but commonly applicable. And that is a lot of times you have one wage earner in that household. And so you'll see, as the other data I'm about to demonstrate here, you have a lot of lower income people, a lot of folks living in poverty. You have a lot of folks in this region, the southern part of the region, of the southern portion of the region that don't have high school degrees and those things. So you see a kind of common thread. And in this case, you have a lot of folks that are not married in the southern part of the region. And again, that gives you at least a reason to think that maybe that is a one wage earner household. And therefore they have lower purchasing power or lower ability to pay certain rent levels. And so as you kind of start thinking through those population characteristics, here's now poverty rates. And again, the greatest shares are across the southern part of the county, region or southeastern portion of the region. Region-wide, your poverty rate's only 10.7%, so it's a little bit lower than the state average. But nonetheless, you got 32,000 people across the region that are living in poverty. And obviously, affordable housing is important to them. I put this one in here too, just to give some sense of families that might be struggling financially. In this case, this is children living in poverty across the region. And as you now clearly can see, there's a theme going on in terms of the southeastern part of the region. You've got a lot of young people living in poverty. So you got a lot of families struggling. So you can see affordable housing for families would be critical to this portion of the region. So this is intra-regional net migration. Essentially, this is an annual change of population, people moving in and out. And so in the chart itself, you can see each of the county listed on the left and all the counties, same counties listed across the top. And showing the relationship of people moving in and out of these counties, green showing positive gains for those counties, and red showing net losses or losses between those counties. And so majority of the counties are experiencing positive net migration, though Benzie and Misaki, we noted on here, are losing more than 250 people within the region on an annual basis. What this helps you understand is just where people are moving to and from within the region, maybe what counties are competitive with your particular county, where are you losing people to regionally, so that maybe is it your housing market, is it your job market, is there some other aspect to your local, to your county that might be influencing these migration patterns. And by the way, in the study itself, we have tons of information on people moving in and out, and specifically like household income stuff or population income information, population age in terms of migration. So you get an understanding of income levels and household age groups that might be moving in and out of your area. And that in itself can tell you a lot about your market. So as I said in the beginning, households are fundamental to what we want to understand in terms of housing needs for an area. And so this is changes from 2010 to 2020, and then 2020 to 22, and then projections up to 2027. And while your household growth rates are slowing down over the last couple of years and are projected to remain slower than it had been in the previous decade, you're still outpacing the growth of the state of Michigan. In this case, projected to grow 3 times the rate the state of Michigan is. And I will tell you this, this is unusual because we study a lot of regions around the country, and many times they have many rural, non-metropolitan areas in them. And rural communities have a tough time holding on to folks because they're moving, especially since COVID has hit. People are moving towards the metropolitan areas for a variety of reasons. And so rural communities are having a tough time holding on to their household base, particularly the younger people under the age of 35. And here in this case, you folks are growing in terms of your household base and are expected to grow. So a little different than, you really defied the odds that a lot of rural parts of the country have faced challenges of holding on to their household base. And that's not the case here. You're actually expanding in terms of households, not big numbers, but nonetheless, you have positive household growth, and that's obviously going to drive demand for the area. And Grand Traverse leading the area at 2.3%. So that's a really good growth rate for Grand Traverse County. And then I just thought I'd give you some specific numbers if you were interested in a particular county to see the changes between these different counties over these different points in time. And I enclose in the red outline the changes from 2022 to 2027. Showing that every county is going to grow with the exception of Missaukee County. Really going to lose very few households, but nonetheless, every county is going to see some growth. It's obviously notable. Grand Traverse itself has representing 3/4 of your region's overall growth. So a lot of the growth is going to be there. But keep in mind, even if your county doesn't have a lot of growth in terms of household, there are other drivers behind housing needs. And I'll talk about some of those things coming up here in a second. So, but nonetheless, check mark 1, you've got positive household growth in virtually every county across the region, and that'll drive housing demand. So one of the things I wanted to share with you, this is your household base of those under the age of 35. It's by county, darker shades of blue representing the higher shares. And so you can see where your younger household base is really down through Grand Traverse County and Wexford County. These are households age 55 and older. By the way, all this data is 2022 estimates. And you can see where the older household base is. And in every case, these are all over 50%, which is an important thing to keep in mind. More than half of your households in your area are over the age of 55. I'll show you here in a second the projected changes for households by age group. But you have a large base of older households. This base is going to grow. So you could speculate that you're going to have to think about housing for seniors in the years ahead. And by the way, yeah, that is overall. Okay. So this is the one I was talking about. This is projected household growth by age groups. This is 2022 to 2027. And what's happening in the region wide is no different than what's happening around the country. You have essentially two waves going through the country right now. It's the older millennials, those 35 to 44 age group, and then 65 and older. And so you're doing exactly what most of the nation is doing in terms of its change or projected change among households by age groups. But obviously this will affect what kind of housing will be in demand or greater demand as the years pass. And so housing for those older millennials, particularly those that would then be, at least theoretically, starting to have families, having kids, getting married, things like that. That's going to be a big segment to the region's housing needs, as well as just the variety of senior-oriented housing that's going to be needed as your seniors age in place or seniors relocate to your area. And oh, by the way, I have a note there too. The table itself was too large to put in this presentation. We do have in the study, though, all this data, for everything I'm presenting here today. We have it for every individual counties. I will tell you this, every county across the region has almost the exact type of trends in terms of those older millennials being one of the segments that grow, are expected to grow, but also the senior base. And so really no difference from county to county. So I think every county is going to go through that same shift in terms of housing needs to meet the needs of these specific age groups. We have really detailed information in terms of household incomes by renters and then also for homeowners. I wanted to keep it simple, at least for this presentation, but you do have details by those 10 years household groups, and it breaks it out by different income levels and things like that. So you can see by individual counties, if you wanted to, what segments are growing specifically, how much they will grow. In this case, I just wanted to illustrate median household incomes as a kind of a marker for increases in incomes, and to show you that really across the region, every county is expected to experience double-digit median household income growth up through 2027. So positive income growth, and you could see in the map itself what the estimates are for 2022 and where the higher income households are versus the lower income. And if you recall, I had all those different population metrics I showed you with education, marital status, poverty, and things like that. And it really was showing where those concentrations were in the southern part of the region. And you can see here, those are the areas that have the lowest median household income. So again, affordable housing to those folks will be critical in the years ahead. This is the share of renter households across the region. Let's see, that's coming off here. Sorry about that. My header's cut off because of the thing on here, Yarrow. I can't see what the top of that says.
So Patrick, those are the ones broken out by income. So the first one's less than 30,000.
Okay.
Yeah, and then they go up.
Okay. Yeah, I might, because I'm the presenter, it's cut off. I can't see it because I've got a menu up there. Okay, so that's less than 30,000 for 2022, the shares. And so you can see where the lower income households are. And keep in mind, we factor that in as we do the housing gap estimates later. You know, what households do you have by different income levels? And so in this case, you can see where the concentration of the lower income households are. Again, these are renters. This is also renters, but then this should be 30 to 59,000, or essentially $60,000. And then we do the same thing for homeowners. So it's homeowners making less than $30,000 a year. And you could see, as I hope you see the common theme across the region, where lower income households are concentrated more in the southern part, southeastern part of the region. So it's no different between renters versus owners, that both are down in that area. These are the more moderate income at $30,000 to $60,000, and the share by county. All right, so another thing we have, this is kind of a common thing that you would see in a lot of housing needs assessments or different reports on housing. And so we wanted to show a couple aspects, and that is right really in the center is the key, the overcrowded housing, and then off to the right, those housing units that are have incomplete plumbing or kitchen facilities. We show it for each county. In the end, you have across the region, you have about 2,000 households that are living in overcrowded housing situations, meaning they have 1.01 or more persons per room. It's not bedroom, it's per room. So this is serious overcrowded housing situations. And then also you have roughly 1,200 housing units across the region that lack complete kitchens or plumbing facilities. So in a day where we talk about availability and affordability, the quality of housing is obviously another fundamental piece to solving housing issues or addressing housing issues. And so you do still have a lot of folks that are living in housing they probably shouldn't be in. So whether it's modernizing those, repairing those, weatherizing them, or outright replacing them, I would think region-wide, and then even within individual counties, preserving or replacing some of your older housing stock that's not in the best condition should be part of the discussion. So housing costs, again, this would be American Community Survey data. So it's data that's fairly easily accessible. I'll show you some really good stuff here in a second that we collected, but this is share of cost burden households by renter versus owner. I marked in green, and those are people that pay over 30% of their income towards their housing cost. But on the right-hand side, I marked in red. These are people that are severe cost burden, housing cost burden, paying 50% of their income towards housing. So you imagine that you're spending more than half of your income towards housing, you don't have much left for other things, transportation, healthcare, food, clothing, I mean, all these kind of basic necessities. And so these are folks that are really struggling in terms of meeting their needs, and housing is obviously stressing them financially. It's worth noting, I marked in red font on Grand Traverse County, almost half of the renters are housing cost burden. And if you look again to the right on that same row for Grand Traverse County, almost a quarter of your renters are severe cost burden. So Grand Traverse County in particular, and other counties are going through challenges with affordability, but Grand Traverse is we got a serious challenge with affordable rental and owner occupied housing. All right, so this is data that our firm collected. So this is where my staff actually contacts the property managers or leasing agents at these properties, and they collect information on the performance and then as well as different aspects of these properties. And so region-wide, we surveyed 130 multifamily apartments, over 7,000 units, 51 vacant. You have a 99.3% occupancy rate. That is a very high rate. Typically in a healthy market, you want some vacancies and you want an occupancy rate closer to 94, 96%, so that people can move around as their financial circumstances change, or they're getting married, or seniors want to downsize or whatever into a rental. You want vacancies for a healthy market. You don't have them. You have an incredible shortage of multifamily rentals. If you're a property owner or investor in real estate, this is good news that you're at 99%, but this is a housing needs assessment. And so we're trying to understand the needs of a community. And so in this case, you've got extremely high occupancy rate, lack of available units, and you could see the different product types that we surveyed, whether it's market rate, tax credit, or government subsidized, or some combination. You still have incredibly low vacancy rates for this product type. I put at the underneath the table itself just an example of the level of detail we collected. Now, a lot of this data will not be in the report, and we're working with Housing North on how to disseminate this type of information. But we have, incredible amount of detail on these properties, because our staff, not only did we call these properties, but we visited the properties themselves, and in some cases talked to property managers on site. But nonetheless, we collected information on the total units, the unit mix, vacancies by type, all those things that I listed on there, as well as photographing the properties. And so if you're somebody that's trying to look at opportunities in these counties, you will have access to information on specific properties in the area. If you're trying to look at your competition, or you're just trying to understand the health of the market and where the needs are for specific product types. But we answer a lot of that in the study itself. You'll still have information in the report, or again, through Housing North, that would have these kind of details. All right, so sticking with multifamily rental housing. So this is a breakout of each one of the counties, the multifamily properties we surveyed, total units, vacant units, and then I marked in red the vacancy rates for the different types. So whether it's overall by each county, or is among the market rate, tax credit, or government subsidized units, and anything in red is 0% vacant. And so there's nothing available. A lot of red on there, so there's not really much available, regardless of the type of rental housing you're looking at, based on affordability level, and regardless of what county you look at. Additionally, we put on this table here the wait list by county. And so whether it's market rate, tax credit, or government subsidized, you can see pretty much universally across the region, everybody's got a wait list of some sort. And so in some cases, they're very large. I mean, the largest for market rates, 100 households within a county, 107 for tax credit, 400 for government subsidized. So serious pent-up demand for affordable housing, but also market rate housing. So if your housing issues aren't limited to a specific county or specific part of the region. It's a region-wide housing challenge in terms of availability. I put this one in here. I thought this was pretty relevant as people try to understand, particularly the needs of the lowest income households in the region. And so one of the things people have access to is housing choice vouchers, where they get these vouchers and it helps them to subsidize their rents, and they can use that at properties that will accept them. And so out of the 493, well, let me say this, you have 493 vouchers issued region-wide, and you've got 8,600 folks waiting, households, 8,600 households waiting to get one of these vouchers. So you have essentially 18 households per every voucher that's out there, people waiting to get one of these. So incredible pent-up demand, and you can see on the table itself on the far right-hand side, the wait list. Every county is a substantial wait list for these vouchers. The other thing I wanted to point out was the column that says unused voucher share. Region-wide, it's 7.7%. So that's 1 in 13 of the vouchers that are issued do not get used. And I would tell you that's a national trend that's going on. Your share is much lower than a lot of markets around the country, where we see that at 20% or 30% of the vouchers that are issued. And one of the reasons is there are many reasons, but one of the reasons that vouchers don't get used is, as you saw, there are no multifamily apartments, or few, that are available to use a voucher. And so you might be lucky enough to get a voucher, but to find a place that will accept it, find a place that has a unit available, is a major hurdle for a lot of these voucher holders. So something I felt was important to point out here in this presentation today. Non-conventional rentals. This is anything that's not a multifamily apartment. So it's a single family home, duplex, mobile home, unit over storefront, whatever it might be. And it makes up a big part of your region's housing stock. In fact, over half of your housing stock is rental housing stock is comprised of these non-conventional rentals. So our staff does a very thorough job of trying to track down what's available across the area in terms of these rentals. They have a lot of resources they go to, and they're pretty diligent in tracking this information. We found 74 among your 10 counties that are available to rent these non-conventional rentals. When I compare that to other properties that have 4 or less units, that's a 99.7% occupancy rate. And again, as I said earlier, you want something closer to 96% for a healthy market. So you have very limited availability among non-conventional rentals. And the ones that we did find, a lot of these have rents well over $1,300. And so a lot of folks in the region do not have income sufficient to pay a $1,300 or higher rent for non-conventional rental. So lack of availability is also a problem here among non-conventional rentals, but affordability is also a challenge for this housing type. So we look at various aspects of the regional for sale housing market. I want to just show you a couple of things in here. Talking about the available inventory, this would have been as of late February of this year, and region-wide, you don't have very much available. It's 0.5%. And just like the multifamily apartment piece, you want some availability for a healthy market. So you have 0.5% available in terms of all of your inventory for owner-occupied housing. A healthy market, you want that at least at 2%, maybe 2 or 3%. So you can see you are well below where you should be. And it doesn't matter what county you're in. I marked it, excuse me, in that column. It shows availability rate, with the exception of one county, which is Emmett at 1.1%, which is still incredibly low. Look at all those counties that are under 1%, and in some cases, many of them below 0.5%. So you have an incredible shortage of for sale housing across the region in every county. The other thing to point out on this was the median list price. You can see region wide, the median list price was almost $400,000. And with few exceptions, a lot of the counties are well over $300,000, and in some cases well over $400,000. So again, lack of availability, lack of affordability. A lot of folks cannot afford to purchase a home in the area. And this is just the availability rate by county. Again, you ideally want this to be closer to 2% or no higher than 3%. and you're well below that. So again, just a demonstration that your housing shortage for trying to buy a home across the region is hitting every county. So this is a breakout of the available inventory. Now I show it by every county by different price segments, starting at anything under $100,000 and going up to the last grouping of $400,000 or higher. And so that group on the left, I outlined in that yellowish color, anything under $200,000, which would often be interpreted as housing that might be available for first-time home buyers. You have 132 of those across the entire region that are available to purchase. And think about that, for across a 10-county area, it's on average, you have about 13 homes that people can purchase that might be priced under $200,000. And in many cases, you have almost half of those under $100,000. I think it's fair to say a home under $100,000 probably has housing quality, insulation, or other weatherization issues, repair costs, modernization costs tied to those. Yeah, it might be $100,000 or less, but you would have additional costs just to get this up to modern living standards and healthy living standards. So limited inventory available to your lowest income households. And then look at all the housing units you have that are priced over $300,000. It makes up, 2/3 or nearly 2/3 of your available housing stock. And yet, when I looked at your renter households by income level across your area, 75% of your renters would never be able to afford that product. So most of your inventory that's available is priced so far out of range for the majority of your renters who potentially could be your first-time home buyers. So you can see the imbalance of what's out there available to purchase. And this is not a Northern Michigan problem. This is a national problem that we have. Every market that I've looked at around the country, the inventory is heavily weighted towards the product over $300,000. And even in the last year, I'm starting to see markets where it's really the bulk of the available inventory is starting to encroach on that $400,000 or higher. So housing is getting further and further out of reach for a lot of folks, and obviously is a challenge for the region. And this is just a distribution of those median home prices for each one of the counties. All right, there's a lot of data on this particular slide. This comes straight out of the report, but I wanted to spend just a minute on this because we've talked a lot about the availability and affordability of housing, but now I want to tie the affordability piece back to the jobs in the area. So what our staff did was we looked for the most common jobs in your area and basically put them here on this table, listed out the just different occupation types. And then we showed you what the lower quartile of income would be for those, or the wages for those, and then also the median. And then we corresponded those incomes to what could you afford. So just looking at the very top one, retail salesperson in the lower quartile of people that have that job, those have a wage of $26,540. So what can they afford in a rent? You go over 2 columns, it's $664 is the rent that they can afford, or what could they buy? An $88,000 home. So you do that for each one of these, whether it's lower quartile or the medians, the midpoint, and you could see what people can afford across the region. So to simplify this, because we had 10 counties and we had multiple jobs, we thought of a way to present this to say, okay, if you work in any one of these jobs and you have these types of wages, can you reasonably afford to rent in your particular county, or can you buy? And so we did this table, the next one. And so again, these are the exact same occupations in the exact same order. Anything in red, at least on those X's going across the screen, is saying if you're a retail salesperson in any one of those counties, you do not have the ability to rent or purchase a home based on what's available in the market. And for the rents, I think we use fair market rent, a 2-bedroom fair market rent for the area. But essentially it's saying you can't reasonably afford to rent or buy in those particular counties. The green check marks would be, okay, those are the moments where that particular job might be able to rent or might be able to buy. But you can see a lot of red on here. The reds under the job titles themselves are basically, there is no county that has any affordable rentals or for sale ownership opportunities for the person that works those particular jobs. So you can see there's a clear challenge for a lot of these common jobs. This is a big part of your labor force, but they can't afford to rent or buy anywhere, or at least in most part, across the region. So affordability tied back to these wages is a major obstacle. We weren't asked to study seasonal or vacation housing because I know that the region had a study done, but I wanted to put something in there just to simply acknowledge, this is a big part of your housing market and a big part of, I think, possible challenges, not just now, but in the future, because we're seeing this in other Western Michigan counties that we're doing deep dive analysis on that are right along Lake Michigan and are heavily influenced by tourism. And so you've got multiple counties here. I marked on the far right-hand side that over 30% of the housing stock, or over 20 at least, in most of the counties are classified as seasonal or recreational housing units. So these are big parts of your market, and many markets, like I said, that are influenced by tourism, this share is just growing and growing. And if you keep in mind that you have such limited availability among all types of your housing, rentals or for sale, but when you have such limited inventory, any increase in the seasonal recreational housing, vacation rentals, Airbnbs, those kind of things are just chipping away at permanent housing stock. And so it just adds to your challenges. And so it's something we want to simply acknowledge in the report, that folks should have this on their radar as they think ahead in terms of their housing issues and possible solutions. All right, so we get the housing gap estimates, and the components of the housing demand are on the left-hand side. So we look at household growth, units required for a balanced market. As I said earlier, you want some vacancies, so we account for that. Replacement of substandard housing, I showed you overcrowded or those units that have an incomplete kitchen or plumbing facilities. We want to account for low quality housing to replace that. We looked at commuters, so external market support. You have a lot of people that are commuting in to the area to work, but they don't stay in the area to live. And so we want to acknowledge there are opportunities to grab some of those folks. And then another demand component is what's called step down support, meaning somebody might have an income that can afford a $1,500 rental unit, but they choose not to. They were going to choose something that's lower priced. And so they're stepping down to a lower priced product, and that is squeezing the availability for those that are most desperate for that type of housing. So step down is something we have accounted for to say, well, you could purchase something higher or rent something higher, but many people do not do that. They'll spend below their means, and they just add to the challenges for lower income housing. And then we factor in any of the product that's in the development pipeline. So anything that's planned or proposed, we want to account for that product that's going to meet part of the need. We want to make sure that we acknowledge that in our housing gap estimates. We also then, on the right side of this, is household income levels. And so we did 4 different levels based on what input we got from folks. And we looked at those that make under 50% of median income, those at 51 to 80, 81 to 120, and 121% or higher. The first 2 tied to specific programs. If you make less than 50%, that's often, or up to 50%, that's tied to government subsidized programs. 51 to 80 is tied generally to the low income tax credit program. And so we wanted to have housing gap estimates that spoke to the specific needs of different affordability levels that often tie back to different programs. So that if somebody is trying to pursue funding for a government under a government subsidy or through the low income tax credit program, you have housing gap estimates that tell you how deep the need is for those particular segments. Again, if you're seeking funding under one or many of the other programs that deal with low income households. So these are the region's rental housing gap by county, by those different targeted income levels. And one of the things to keep in mind, we did do the income level segmentation, or what income level people can afford based on HUD's published limits for each one of these counties. So this wasn't a universal, like one size fits all across the region. We did look at each county's income limits and built that into our models. And so that is accounted for. And so when you're looking at a specific county, you know that we did look at that county specific income and rent limitations. In the end, you have a need for over 8,800 rental units across the region. It shows it, the greatest needs by county. No surprise because of the size of it. Grand Traverse has the largest need, followed by Wexford County. But the need is across every county, across all levels of affordability. The highest level of need, though, for rental units is those that make under up to 50% of area median household income. But again, you have need for even higher end market rate stuff. One of the things I want to stress to folks, though, it's important when you interpret these numbers is even though the region may have a need for 8,800 rental units, that is essentially telling you if you want to solve every housing issue, you want to make sure you accommodate household growth. You want to make sure that you meet the needs of people living in substandard housing. You want to make sure that we account for potential opportunities to grab commuters. We want to have enough vacancies to have a balanced, healthy market. All those things. If you want to solve everything, this is the level of need. So clearly, you will not be able to do 8,800 rental units across the region to solve your issues. But what I would be strongly recommending folks as they look at this data is this should help communities take an individual county, for example, and help them understand where are our priorities. If we're going to address our housing needs, what affordability level should we make our efforts focused upon? And so this is a great tool to start helping communities establish their priorities, or the region as a whole, as it starts to think, groups like Housing North and others start to think through where do we focus our energy, our financial efforts, our partnerships, all those kind of things to help solve housing issues. This helps establish those types of priorities. And then we did the same thing for the for sale housing market. These are the housing gaps across the region, 22,000. A big part of that is the projected growth among owner households over the next several years is driving that. But again, your needs are across the region with a big chunk of the greatest need for those that make between 81 and 120% of area median. And then we have recommendations. Keep in mind, the recommendations were broad on purpose because we're talking about a region, but we're also talking about individual counties. And so ultimately, it's going to be up to the individual counties to kind of think through their specific approach, what their priorities should be, what strategies they want to implement. But, as we showed you just a second ago, we have housing gaps shown by different affordability levels for both rentals and for sale. And so you use that kind of information as well as other information we have in the study to start setting goals for your community. Where should our priorities be? Are there certain benchmark data sets that we need to start to focus on that may be already in this report, but you want to update over time to see, do we have more inventory? What are we doing with prices? Are they increasing faster? Those kind of things. So there's a lot of metrics you can monitor. So that would be, I think, one of the early steps of something you'd want to do. The next two recommendations we have here really could be combined. It's essentially looking at resources, leveraging those that you have, those you can access to figure out how do we encourage more housing. You desperately need more housing, but you also need to preserve the existing housing stock that you have. You've got a lot of older product, you got a lot of substandard stuff that could be updated. So and somebody has a question. Yara, do you want to see what that comment was?
Yeah, we'll take questions in just a minute. I'll let you wrap up, but
Okay.
I would just encourage anybody who has a question to type it into the Q&A. And that's how we will do questions here.
All right, I'll be done here in 2 minutes. Obviously, one of the things I think Housing North does a great job, and that is networking and working with other organizations. So again, the recommendation is to continue to pursue that, but individual communities and counties should be doing the same approach as well. They should be building those relationships. Because I can tell you, if anybody thinks local government's going to solve this or state government's going to solve this, they've underestimated the problem. If anybody thinks a nonprofit group's going to do this, they've underestimated. They think a developer, private sector is going to solve this. You've underestimated the problem. So you really need, it sounds cliche, but you'd really need all hands on deck to solve this because the problems are rather large and can be complex to solve some of these housing issues. So you want to continue to build those kind of relationships. Obviously, again, an example of Housing North, but others can make sure that they're continuing to provide the resources and information for others. Everybody needs to be up to speed and educated on the housing challenges that they face, but also working together on some of these solutions. We recommended an outreach or almost like a marketing campaign to continue to spread the word. I know Yarrow and people in her organization plan to get out and reach out to individual communities and counties across the region. And so that obviously needs to be part of it. But there's many other things you can do. I know Housing North does some of that stuff, but there's other networking and marketing, public relations stuff, marketing materials you can put out. So a lot of that stuff obviously needs to be part of your planning process. I know I told Yara this before, that I often, when I'm talking with other communities, we recommend folks look at the Housing North website. This before I really knew Yarrow. I just found their website. I was like, this is a really phenomenal website. But there's other things that can be done. And I think a lot of communities really, it's one of those low hanging fruits. You could build a really good housing resource center, whether it's for your county or again, Housing North or other advocates add on to what they have. And I have tons of ideas for that, but nonetheless, there's something you could do. And then we put at the end here, the last one, we didn't study a lot of this stuff, but I do want folks to strongly think about seasonal housing. I think it's probably on a lot of folks' radar, but I don't underestimate the influence of that market on what is happening in northern Michigan. So look at your housing or your seasonal housing and what might be done. We had in the study a brief part. We were not asked to study this, but I put in information on potential sites. It was just a high-level cursory overview. But I think you could do something very sophisticated and very helpful to show where our sites in the region. And again, we could talk about that and what that might look like, because a lot of communities are really proactive in trying to demonstrate the sites they have for potential residential development. You could do a deeper dive on housing quality issues. You could do a deeper dive on local regulations. Are there things in place that are, whether it's in your zoning or building codes or something that's holding back community? So a ton of other stuff we didn't study. And I just want to throw out some examples to start thinking through, because again, housing is very complex. The things that are stymieing or serving as barriers to residential development. I mean, there's a lot of that stuff you could do a deeper dive and find, what those things might be. So anyway, we wanted to throw those in there. The last slide I have on here is just to remind people, we do have individual county chapters. So you have information on every county. So it summarizes all the key demographics, all the housing supply information we collected. It'll have just the information for just your county broken out in great detail. We even do a SWOT analysis of strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. We have a summary of what's going on in each county and what we think those aspects are. So with that said, I have no idea where we at on time, but I assume we hit close to what I was given.
Yeah, thank you, Patrick. I think that was really awesome. We do have a few questions in the chat. So I want to start with the first one, which I wish I knew the answer to, and hopefully you do, but was Beaver Island included in this study? So Beaver Island is an island off the county of Charlevoix. And so when you looked at data,
it should have been, yeah, we would have pulled that. We wouldn't have just pulled mainland stuff. It would have been anything that's technically the county limits would have been accounted for, yes. And let me ask you this real quick before we go further. Do you want me to stop sharing this or do you want to leave it
maybe
up?
just stop for now? We'll try to answer the questions, and then if you need to bring it back up, we can. And so I think the other question out there is just to talk a little bit more about the impact of short-term rentals are having on the market, and any recommendations you would have to local units of government. I know you didn't dive into that. We do have a study that Networks Northwest just put out. So I guess I just wanted to see if you do have any recommendations around that.
Yeah, I think as you move forward, we because we have studied other counties and gotten deeper into the issue. And so I can provide recommendations of communities that are very proactive in controlling that segment of the market. I mean, some of them it's outright banning it, to others that just want to monitor and kind of control it to some degree through zoning or fees or whatever. So we have tons of examples we could share with folks if that is something that they want to understand a little bit better.
So there is a question to see if you could show the owner gap estimates again. Yeah. So the one that showed the owner, and while Patrick's pulling that up, I will just say that, we do have the housing needs assessment on our website under data. And so you can look this up, and I would encourage you to really look at the SWOT analysis that he mentioned for your county. And as you get into diving in deeper to the data, you can email us questions and we will try to get around and present to your community. And then anything we can't answer, we'll run by Patrick. So here is the owner housing gap estimate. And one thing I did want to mention too is this is a different study than we got back in 2019. So this is a housing needs assessment, and we had a target market analysis in 2019 that projected 2020 to 2024 data. And those are very different studies, so we don't want to get in the weeds of comparing them. But Patrick, I guess I just thought maybe you could say a few words about that, and then these will be in our Q&A because they are different in what the gap estimates were for rentals and homeownership.
Yeah, they are different studies for sure. one of the biggest difference, at least that I believe in our study, was we got really deep into the weeds in terms of the housing inventory. And so we do have a lot of details on both the rental and the owner occupied housing stock, particularly the available inventory. I'm not sure that those were in the target market analysis. I looked, I didn't see it, but that doesn't mean it's not there. I will tell you this, we have so much detail broken out for these properties. Take, for example, the available inventory. We break that out by different parts, not just geography, but price points, and I think maybe even bedroom types and things like that. So you have a very deep understanding of the for sale housing market, but the same thing for the rental housing supply. We break out a lot of details and then get into, I think really a fundamental piece is, what are the occupancy rates? Are there wait lists? How deep is the pent up demand? We get onto those vouchers and things like that. So I don't think that target market analysis went there. I think they had a different objective, and it was a good report. But so just different reports. And keep in mind too, I mean, that study was issued 2020. So I don't know what the data was, maybe 2019 or something. So this is more current information. It's the latest market. It's post-COVID. So almost treated as a totally different report with really good and current information.
So thanks, Patrick. One other question that came up is, how were ADUs characterized? And did you do any analysis of the impact of ADUs to date and potential projected?
No, we didn't. So we didn't study specific types of structures. So whether it was townhomes, ADUs, condos, any of that stuff, the study didn't get to that level of analysis. We have studied some markets where ADUs are, or at least the community is contemplating having something in place for zoning or whatever to deal with and encourage ADUs, lot splits, making it easier for folks to split their lots and then sell it off so somebody can develop it. So those kind of things, we did not study that here.
Okay, another question coming up here was, hold on one second, I gotta filter through these for a second. So one question was whether or not everything you presented here is in the report, and I believe that's yes. So everything that you see is in the report, the charts, and just maybe it looks a little different because of how you formatted the slides.
Exactly right. Yeah, it might look a little different, but I think a lot of stuff's copied straight out and pasted. I might have just added some extra comments where I had, I think, there's 18 households waiting for a voucher for every one that's issued. I didn't say that in the study, but as I was preparing this, I thought, okay, that's maybe a better demonstration of how desperate the need is. So there might be a few comments in this presentation that might not appear exactly, but yes, 99% of it here is going to be in the study.
Okay.
So, and by the way, as I said earlier too, we have 45 minutes here today, so it's a large report. I don't remember the size of the regional, but a few hundred pages. And so there's so much great information I just couldn't get to here today. So folks really should dive into it, and certainly they can reach out to you or I and say, hey, I can't find this topic. Did they cover it? I'm sure you and I can guide them in the right direction.
Okay, so I have a few more questions coming in here. I'm going to try to answer them in order here. And one of them was just about the development of trust funds at the county level. And how that could contribute to some of the solutions. And I think I can answer this and say that, yes, we're looking into that. And so we're also looking at having a webinar here on the 10th, where we'll be bringing somebody in through the Leland Housing Ready program to talk about housing trust funds. So yes, we're looking at it. And Patrick, I didn't know if you wanted to speak to what other communities who have developed housing trust funds and how that helped with their housing needs assessments.
I'll leave your answer as the answer.
Okay. So I think we'll cover that one, and we can dive in deeper at another point on housing trust funds. The other question or statement and then question is, I noticed that some of the earlier cost burden slides were based on ACS 2016 to 2020 median home values. Do you have any thoughts about how the median home value increases have affected cost burden profiles?
I would just speculate here. I don't have anything data to point to, but I would think with home values climbing, mortgages climbing, interest rates, all that stuff, I would venture a guess here that cost burden shares are probably climbing around the country. Look at rental rates, not just for where you are, but rental rates around the country, particularly market rate. They're escalating at double-digit figures, and at least the last couple of years. And so way outpacing income growth. And so a cost burden, if there was a cost burden number that was for 2023, which does not exist, but if it came out right now, I would say we probably would see much higher cost burden ratios. Because affordability is just, it's, you got two anchor problems across the country, but Northern Michigan's no different. And that is it's availability and affordability. And so those are two massive hurdles. And, it's interesting that over the past year, and with mortgage rates, actually since early 2022, they climbed so fast. And you would think that would slow down the escalation of home prices. But a lot of the markets we've gone into, that hasn't changed a thing. I mean, home prices are still escalating in many markets around the country at double-digit rates up through at least early this year. So the interest rates aren't doing anything other than maybe slowing down some development activity and some home purchases. But in terms of pricing, it's slowing it down a little bit. It's not making a dent.
Thank you. A few more here. So what source was used in the study to determine homes that were vacant or homes that were seasonally occupied?
I don't remember the data source for the seasonal recreational housing is ACS information. Because we weren't asked to study it, there are other data sources we use. I can't think of them off the top of my head because I have somebody that specializes in that. But we pull other information, including stuff that Yara from the group that did your seasonal housing study. And so they led us onto other data sources. But for this, again, we just had the one slide in there and one table in the whole study. That was American Community Survey data to give some sense of how big is that market. The caveat to that for folks who may already be thinking this or not, that's counting like second homes. So some of that is not Airbnb and somebody renting out as a vacation rental. Some of that is somebody else has a second house. But the point of that is, regardless of what it is, whether it's a short-term vacation rental or it's a seasonal housing unit, that's a unit that's not available to your permanent residents. And that's what we're trying to get to. And so we illustrated in most of those markets, it's over 1/5 of your housing stock. And that's a problem.
So Patrick, this is sort of just what we've talked about, I think, on our staff meeting, but there is a lack of local units of government really fully understanding their rental units. Is that something that you noticed in your study? Like basically, if they're going to track short-term rentals or seasonal rentals without having a rental ordinance or anything that really tracks that, it's hard to gather that data. And I think that's something we're trying to encourage versus us going out and doing a lot of studies on short-term rentals. We are trying to encourage our units of government and municipalities to really understand their own rental data and gather it that way because it is different across the region.
Yeah, I know you are like some communities we've talked with, not necessarily up where you are, but just other parts of the country. They have like a registry, a minimum. You're not doing anything special. We just want to know where these homes are. And but what I've learned is without any kind of enforcement mechanism, Patrick Bowen could have 3 rentals, and I'm not going to bother registering with my town officials. And so that's the challenge I think a lot of communities are facing. And even when they try to enforce it, that can become a obstacle for communities. But that would be a place to start. Could a community have just a registry of some sort so that local officials can at least give some sense of tracking it? And even if everybody doesn't register for that, at least if a large number did, you'd at least have some sense. Is this for our town? Is this a major piece of our housing stock or is it not?
Thank you. And we'll have some more follow-up discussions on this, I'm sure, as we move forward with the short-term rental discussion. But one question that came up is the data accounting for any new units under development in the region?
Yes. So when we did that, so you'll see in the study itself, there's a section where I think we call it development pipeline. And it's essentially, we listed every single property we could find, whether it was market rate tax credit or government subsidized or even the for sale housing market. We talked to local planning officials. Out of all the research we did, that was probably one of the most time consuming parts because you got to keep in mind, we're calling not just county planning departments, we're calling individual municipalities. Well, in a 10-county area, you can imagine how many municipalities have planning departments. Now, some do not, but some do. So that was a lot of phone calls our staff had to make. We also looked at the tax credit allocation list and other resources to see what else might be coming. So in the end, the answer is we did identify to our best ability. I think we did a good job what's in the development pipeline, meaning it could be something that's actually under construction. It could be something that's been approved and it's moving forward. They just haven't broken ground. But also we referenced projects that were proposed where somebody has presented the project, but they haven't either secured financing or they haven't gotten local government approval for the project. But we wanted to acknowledge those properties because they could be coming online. And then for those properties that we knew got their financing, got approved, those were actually accounted for when we did our housing gap estimates, because we wanted to make sure we got some supply coming online. It's going to help solve some of the issues, but not all of them. So yes, they're in there.
Thank you. And I think we're nearing the 11 o'clock, time frame. I do have one more question. And so if anybody does have some last questions they want to put in the chat, otherwise you can email me or Alana, and we'll start to compile some questions and get them answered. But the last question I see is there an overlap between the various income levels in rentals and ownership needs, or are these separate analyses?
Great question. They're separate. So we segmented each one. So where one income level leaves off at 50% of median, for example, that's where the next one picks up. So there is no overlap. There's no double counting. But keep in mind, a lot of these programs, because of household, I don't want to get into the weeds here, but because of household sizes and the limitations tied to household sizes, there's a lot of these that technically have overlap. But for Bowen's purposes, for these housing gap estimates, we looked at one income segment that was totally individual from the next and so forth. So there's no double counting in here. And that's probably a good point to make too, is if you're in a community that we have a housing gap of 200 units at 50% or lower of median, that doesn't mean you can't do more than 200 units. It's just saying that, look, if we segment these out based on certain assumptions, this is the depth of the need. And so what I don't want to happen is if somebody, I mean, these numbers are all big for most of these counties, but take Charlevoix County, 173 is one of the smaller ones for owner occupied housing. If somebody were able to build housing that was affordable to those folks and exceed that 173, it's possible. You can do more than that. That's where site-specific market feasibility studies come in, where you probably need to now know specifically for this site what's its needs, because some communities in a county actually might border another county, so they're getting support from that other county, and we don't account for that. So there can be overlap between counties and opportunities. So again, this is really a guide for setting priorities and goals for communities.
All right, well, I think we answered every question. The two questions that are in there about more specifics to our region, I will follow up with those individuals. But wanted to just give you a chance, Patrick, to say, did we miss anything? Is there any other take homes you want people to know about this study before they dive in to the actual full report?
No, I mean, keep in mind with 10 counties and the scope of work that we had, there's obviously a lot of things that could be considered and evaluated. And so those recommendations, I cited just a few. I mean, take regulations alone. I mean, that in itself can be a major obstacle for some communities because they're never going to attract certain developers, particularly high density multifamily housing. They may just not have they may not have the ideal zoning in place. And so there's many other things. So there's a lot of topics that you still could dive into. What I would do moving forward would be I would talk to individual counties at a minimum, if not some of the communities, and say, okay, we have an understanding of our needs and our challenges. What do we what do we want to focus in on? Do we want to focus in on regulatory issues, land use issues? Do we want the question was about ADUs. Is that a strategy for our community? I mean, these stuff is so nuanced. I think individual communities and counties need to start thinking through what do they want to do? What does their focus want to be? What resources do they have access? Some communities will have access to more resources than others, not just financial, but even staffing or physical capacity. Who's going to take on these roles? Some of these communities are small and their staffs, local governments are small. They don't have people or expertise to dedicate towards this. And so maybe there's a role for folks like Housing North or other housing advocates to step in and fill those gaps. So housing's complicated and but it's solvable. People just got to temper maybe their expectations and just steadily move through this. And this is a great start, right? You've assessed the need. You have a good understanding of the demographics now, where they're heading. You have an understanding of the current housing market conditions. You have an idea of the depth of need by different affordability levels. So you've got a good foundation to start having more conversations and then allow individual counties and communities to start to kind of figure out their specific path that they want to go after. So you're on the right track, and we're here on the sidelines. If if anybody, not just you, Yarrow, obviously anybody that you know, and or people that are on this webinar, if they want to reach out and say, Bowen, have you seen this? Can you give us an example? And we've worked, I think we're closed in on our 100th housing needs assessment. So you can imagine we've built a lot of relationships around the country. And so if I've seen something that works well, and you say, Patrick, we're thinking about doing this in this particular county, who can we talk to? And there's a good chance I have somebody that said, hey, they went through this. They started this program. They can tell you lessons learned, like don't do this part. We should have never done it, but here's the stuff that works. So you get to that point, let me know if I can direct you to the right resources.
Thank you. And I think just one more question before we wrap up, if you could just explain. So we had 8 communities that were at the population level that you thought would make sense to do a community assessment. Why would a community who didn't sign on yet want to consider doing their own community assessment, versus looking at the 10 county or the county by county data? Maybe you could just speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you asked that. So well, there's no specific minimum size. I mean, I think Yarrow, you and I talked, and somebody else with your staff talked about, ideally, if it was 5,000 or more people, you get good data. If you go down to 2,500 people in a community, it's less good, if that's the right way to say it. But the real challenge is a lot of the smaller communities don't have a lot of housing to begin with. And so there wouldn't be any apartments for us to study. There wouldn't be, with a town of less than 2,500 people, there might be 2 homes that are available to purchase. So there wouldn't be a lot of data for us to analyze. So I would caution smaller communities maybe not to have a individual study done unless they join together with maybe a township or another village or something like that. So now you have a little bit of a bigger area. The reason you'd want that is the county needs assessment is truly a county needs assessment, right? It's treating the county as a whole. And so while this might be a characteristic, the lack of available units, affordability issue, a certain demographic characteristic or trend, it might not necessarily apply to individual communities. And so there they may benefit from seeing something specific about them. We have a higher concentration of seniors than other parts of the county. We have a higher concentration of low-income families relative to the rest of the county. There would be the benefit of having a more refined, smaller geography studied. Again, I would just caution really smaller communities, either join up with somebody else or maybe I point those communities to data themselves versus spending any money on such an effort.
Thank you. And then that was one question, what were the 8 communities? So I guess I'll just say that we reached out to all of the cities and villages that we thought might make sense for them to get more detailed data. And so I think if I have them memorized right, it was Traverse City, Manistee, Cadillac, Petoskey, Frankfurt, Alberta, and then we had a couple of smaller communities that were interested. So, and I can share those offline with the person who asked. So if you're interested and want to learn more, we're just now bringing those out to those communities. But I do believe if you do still want an add-on community assessment, it's quite possible we could do that. And so just reach out to me and I'll get in touch with Bowen on those. So we did encourage any of the major cities in our region to consider doing that, just because they will be hosting probably bulk of the need right now, because that's where the infrastructure is in our region.
Let me add this about the smaller studies, or more focused studies. The good thing is that they're nominal cost because the research is done, right? We have collected everything on the housing stock. So the only difference is we'd have to run new demographics on that township, municipality, whatever, run that and build that into something. But the inventory in terms of the housing supply, we've collected it all. So now it's just extracting out that small towns, multifamily apartments, for sale housing stock or whatever. So it's a fairly easy and fairly, the people that put it together for me, they would say it's not that easy. For me, it's easy because I just say, let's get this done. But it's not that complicated of a process because the work has been done. So that, I guess my advice would be if there was ever a time to do it, it's now. The next several months, the data is still going to be good for months. If you waited a year or 2 years from now, you're going to have to get apartments resurveyed. You're going to have to get the for sale housing stock re-inventoried, and there's where the costs would start to build. So if you're a small community thinking about it, this is the time to do it, because you're going to save a ton of money, and you get answers faster because we have it. We can pull it together quickly.
Well, thank you so much, Patrick. Thank you for everyone who came. I'll just close this by saying we will send out a copy of the recording to everybody who signed up. And then we will be using this as we move in this data and sharing it outward, but also as we inform our regional housing plan. So if you're not aware of what's happening there, please go onto our website under the data and resources tab, go down to data, and then also there's a page about the regional housing partnership and plan work. So thank you again, Patrick. This is amazing for our community. We're really excited to start sharing it out, and we hope to have a Q&A and some summary documents by the first or second week in July. So we'll try to answer any other questions offline, and thank you again.
Thank you.
All right.